Over the past year, diving into the world of AI tools has been an exhilarating journey for all of us. But what happens when these tools enter the dynamic world of a thriving business where there's much more at stake? You see, that's where the real challenge begins. AI isn't a newcomer. It's been gaining steadily over the years, and in parallel, Worldwide Technology has spent over a decade refining their mastery in this area. It's no wonder that leaders from business and tech sectors are turning to them asking, how do we navigate this new terrain? Well, WWT has answers, yet they're also in the thick of addressing these same challenges. A global giant with thousands of employees and fierce competition, the stakes couldn't be higher. And with 3 decades in tech, their insights are gold, rare and valuable. And joining us today from the caffeinated tech hub of the Northwest, Ankur Gupta, WWT's Director of Data Science, and from the epicenter of cultural heritage and artistic expression, consultant Dale Hsu. Now, Dale plays a crucial role in overseeing WWT's internal AI deployments, responsibility underscored by his weekly meetings with CEO Jim Kavanaugh. Today's show is based on the published research titled How WWT is Harnessing Generative AI to Drive Internal Business Value. Well, we take a deep dive into 2 Gen AI projects WWT's rolled out for internal use. We'll check out how they picked them, what they hoped for, and the results that they're seeing. I'm your host, Rob Boyd. I firmly believe that the wisdom and triumphs of our predecessors form the bedrock of today's progress. Welcome to Worldwide Technology Presents Research, with insights powered by the Advanced Technology Center. Tell us what you do for Worldwide and how long you've been doing it.
Ankur Gupta, I've been with Worldwide for about 8 years. I am a data science director here with Worldwide, but primarily my background has been in analytics and data science. Way before it was called the sexiest job of the century, I think it was, data scientist.
I missed that one. What are
but
you
back
reading?
then we were called big data.
What are you reading that finds out that calls your percent?
Oh.
I like that though. I agree.
Yeah,
The sexiest? That's cool. How often do we ever get that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was at one time it was called the sexiest job of the century, and I think it got recently dethroned by prompt engineering as being the sexiest job of the century. But yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last 14 years or so. But more recently with the Worldwide, leading their data science practice, making sure our deliveries to customers in the AI domain are as smooth as possible.
Gotcha. Okay. Dale, what is it you do for Worldwide, and how are you going to help us today?
Hey everyone, my name is Dale. I'm currently a consultant with Worldwide Technology. I've been with the company for around 3 years. In the latest initiative, I help lead our internal Gen AI Center of Excellence under Ankur. Happy to share everything about Gen AI today.
Well, that's perfect, because that's exactly where I want to go in this conversation, which is to talk about, we're building this on a research paper that both of you contributed not only to the research, but to the writing, as I loosely understand it. But the idea is that you guys are doing things internally with generative AI that other companies are wanting to do for themselves, because it's not been easy to figure out. The hype is so high, and there's so many interesting things we can do as individuals. But the smart customers are not wading into this super fast and throwing money at it, even though it can feel like you might need to do something like that because things are operating so quickly and changing so quickly. And so I love where you guys can both speak to us as an enterprise who's doing this for your own users, but then you're plowing the same education in that and then sharing it with clients, as I understand it. So we're going to talk more about the specific projects that were featured in this research paper, but let's get a good grounding in how far you guys have come with AI in general. So Ankur, I guess I'll start with you and talk about WWT's vision for AI. I believe practical AI is something I've heard you guys say a lot. Do you mind explaining what that is and how it fits?
Yeah, even before I get into practical AI, like WWT has been doing AI for the last 10 years, by the way. We've had an AI practice and a team for the last 10 years, and we've delivered for our customers from like industrial, mining, up to like financial services and retail. Most recently, the buzz with the AI, we've just reinforced on our messaging that has been the same for the last 10 years, which is practical AI, which is the industry is going to come up with a whole lot of new innovations. Some of those might be the best fit for you. Some may require a bit of tweaking. And sometimes customers just need something totally brand new. So practical AI is that balance between where you need to build something new or buy something off the shelf, or buy something off the shelf and kind of build and do a hybrid in between. So that is where we, recommend to our customers, like, don't go in with a set template of like, I just want to buy or I just want to build. Let us figure it out for you and recommend to you what would be the right thing there. If it's something as, innovative as, Gen AI has been for the last 1 year, maybe it's a hybrid. You don't need to build a new LLM, but you can build off of LLMs that Microsoft and the Metas of the world have built, and kind of just tweak your solution on top of it. That's very similar to what we've been doing internally as well.
What are the decisions that need to be understood, or what are the big things that jump out at you from clients saying, I'm trying to make a build versus buy decision? How should I be looking at this in general, broad strokes across industries?
One of the first things we saw with customers was Gen AI specifically. When it came on board, it was like this holy grail, like this magic black box where you could just dump in all your data and would have answers. Well, we have to bust some myths over here, which is that you cannot just dump in all your data into an LLM. There is still data governance, still is the meat of everything. You still have to have your data in a certain format. You have to have that data accessible. All the silos in your organization still have to be broken down. So all of that still remains. Those foundations are what we build on top of. But essentially, yes, after that, it's all about making sure the LLMs are hooked up right and they can read from your data. We do the indexing right, we do the chunking right, we do the similarity matches right. And through that effort, we've kind of perfected that art over the last 6 months or so.
And I think that's a great point, because I think we tend to, that combined with the fact that when you want to roll your own from a data center perspective, there's plenty of open source projects that I can download and run on a machine. But to think that would scale to an organization, or the data that an organization needs to process, is infinitely bigger, as I understand it, from a machine perspective, and the number of GPUs and the compute power. And that's why we see these big extremes of large companies that are well versed in the market, able to invest appropriately to be able to get answers like this. But we've got to figure out, well, what's that balancing act? And this is what you guys, it sounds like, have been working on quite a bit.
Exactly. And that goes back to practical AI. We see Google and we see Amazon and all the cloud providers coming up with their products, which is like, oh, throw your data in there and you have a chatbot. Well, that works. I'm not saying that doesn't work, but does it really solve the problem that you're trying to tackle with your use cases? Does it actually answer the question that you're trying to get out of those documents? Maybe, maybe not. And that's where we come in with practical AI, help with all the nitty-gritties and tweakings. That has taken us the last 6 months to build something internally within WWT.
You guys, I read about a kind of a 3-layer model about kind of advising kind of where you're spending your time now and why it's important to understand these layers. And I believe this is what you're using this and how you describe to customers about your approach. Can you tell me what is that? What are these 3 layers and how do they relate to each other? And why is that important to understand?
What we've observed is that this whole model of in-context learning, or otherwise called RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, that's the one picking up, which can get you to results or outcomes really, really fast. The main 3 layers in there are, number 1, the generative layer, which is basically where your creativity lies and where your synthesis lies. And those are essentially the LLMs. That could be an open source LLM. That could be a proprietary LLM from an Amazon or a Meta or a Google or a Microsoft. We don't care about that. For
Can
us,
it be both?
Yeah.
Could it be multiple? Okay.
Oh, it could be multiple.
It could be design.
Yes, it could be a hybrid. Yeah.
Okay, but the idea is to distinguish it at its own layer. Okay.
Exactly. But essentially for us, it's a plug and play. There's some minor parameters in there that you could tweak with, like temperature settings and stuff like that. But for us, it's plug and play. The meat of the development that needs to be done to get to an outcome are the 2 layers that we call the context layer and the orchestration or the exchange layer. The context layer is what we were talking about earlier, where you take your proprietary data, your organization data, and do the embeddings on it, do the chunking on it, and basically translate it into a format that is fit for your purpose that you're trying to build in terms of a chatbot. So think about all the metadata in the world that is associated to a file. Who's the author? What's the title? What department does this person belong to? All of that needs to be taken care of in the context layer. And then you go to the exchange layer, which is basically just the bridge between the context layer, the generative layer, as well as the user experience. And it's kind of trying to do all the orchestration around all these things, make sure the caching is done right, make sure the results are timely. So this is also the layer that we see or we project that a lot of innovation will happen. Essentially, because most of the effort has been concentrated towards the context layer and the generative layer for the last year or so. That is where all the people are like investing their time, money, and intellect in. As these products go more mainstream in terms of like more enterprise grade usage, the exchange layer is found to get all that attention now, so that response times can be quicker. RBAC can be put in place, and all those good things that come with enterprise applications.
But it also, that exchange layer also helps you kind of define how you're going to interact with those modules and keep those things distinct, right? So that you don't, once you've chosen the appropriate LLM balances based on whatever they are toward what you want to achieve, you kind of forget about those and you focus all your time on the contextual layer to interact with those things and pull that. And that focuses your efforts, your time, and your attention on the results that you want to achieve.
A very good example over there on what the exchange layer allows us to do. As you said, multiple LLMs, Google's LLM and Microsoft or OpenAI's LLM, both can be sitting in the generative layer. And based on the complexity of the query coming in, the exchange layer can kind of decide, oh, the Google API is 50% cheaper than the Microsoft one. The Microsoft one is more expensive, but it can handle different queries. So how should I kind of route these queries? Those things can happen in real time and be optimized for cost as well as quality.
What I like too is those things improve, because everybody's in this arms race to improve and come out with new and better models, and very specific models for different things, whether it be visuals or text or moving images or what is it? Vision, computer vision. Then those can change and update, yet it won't, the way, if you design correctly the way you're describing it, then I assume then all your work on the contextual layer can stay the same and benefit from the updated LLMs, and therefore you can scale more efficiently, uniquely to what you've developed.
Except when multimodal goes mainstream. Multimodal will have like images and videos and whatnot. And right now, I don't even know what the context layer for those might look like. I can only guess. We've started playing around with it. But yes, the concept is that hopefully we shouldn't have to change the context layer. But what if the data changes? There is no text anymore. It's all images and videos. What does that look like then?
But what I love about what you just said is that this is what I like about working with engineers and technical types is that, are you now acknowledging that things may change? Are you saying that we don't have it all figured out? Of course not.
Yeah.
Right.
That's always the case. Like things change, like change is the only constant, right? So we may still call them the context layer, exchange layer, generative layer 6 months down the line. The inner workings might be very different than what they are right now.
Well, I want to ask Dale about these internal projects that you guys have been on. These are the features of the paper. But to set this up, I'm going to stick with you for 1 minute longer, Ankur, helping understand how the ATC has changed. And because this composable AI lab, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but you guys have specifically invested in the ATC. First, describe what the ATC is, and then kind of describe how the composable labs are starting to change things there.
Yeah, the ATC has really been a differentiator for us at Worldwide and our data scientists and our team. The ATC, the main vision or the main objective over there was to allow our customers to get access to the latest and greatest equipment that they essentially want to decide on, like whether they should get company A's version B model or company B's or company XYZ's, something else. So how do you compare? That's the ATC.
Yeah.
Put everything that's out there, the latest and greatest, into one data center, let people play around and test it out and do combinations and figure out what's the right stack for them, and then take the decision to buy it, after having tried it. And as a data scientist, getting access to all that gear upfront is phenomenal. Like I remember even 2 years ago, we used to have access to the best GPUs back then, and my peers or my friends outside of WWT, they were like, "Oh, how do you even get access to that kind of stuff? Like, we don't get access to it. It's not there on Azure for us to spin it out."
Yeah.
So it was fun. And even right now, it's like taken up so much. For example, NVIDIA's H100s, A100s, these are in such short supply. There's like a 1 year wait time for our customers to get hands on. And we have those in the ATC right now. So the AI composable lab that we're talking about right now, That's the latest and greatest focus on AI. So the greatest GPUs right now, the best storage infrastructure that supports AI workloads, and also like network and all of that stuff. It's getting access to all of that, so it enables us to learn about all that stuff and advise our customers, and our customers to come, be hands-on with all of that stuff before they order it.
Let me try something on you that I just thought of. ATC is really about moving from theory to practicality. So as you work with someone to say, this is how it should work, these are the components we think based on this, but then it becomes, well, let's plug it in and make sure that it does what we think it'll do, because 99% of the time, there's going to be some changes with that. Or you learn something about that vendor's implementation with that model, perhaps, has these unexpected effects. And that's the kind of stuff we want to find in the lab versus in deployment, where it gets super expensive and harder to turn around, right?
It also helps us figure out vaporware from reality. So if there's like a product vendor or someone who's like, oh, test my AI product or solution and, see how good it works. We'll be like, let's, get it up and running at the ATC.
Oh, you have a lab.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, no. Well, let's go into these two projects that you guys have embarked upon. And the reason why I love these examples from this paper is that it's easy to forget that most of us relate to WWT as a vendor. You provide services, you have smart people that I can hire and engage with, but you're also a company, and you've got all the same company issues everyone else does, from regulation to where to make smart investments for the future to, just being a good steward of your stakeholders, so to speak, even though you guys are privately held, but still, you guys are very well run. And first, Dale, let me ask you, because I think you'd be familiar with this. I assume that the two that we're going to talk about, the ATC assistant, as I know it from the paper, as well as the RFP assistant, these things are two that you started working on, but there was many more being suggested by business units when asked to say, hey, what should we work on? And you guys had to go through a criteria of choosing what to focus on. Assuming you're familiar with that, do you mind explaining kind of what that thought process is in broad strokes and how you settled on these two?
Yeah, sure, Rob. I think the whole process, it's a very lengthy one. And it's one that came exactly as ordered from Jim, right, our CEO. So from the top down, the direction was that, hey, see, guys, Gen AI is a thing that, has sprung into action in the last half year. Could we do something about it internally? If so, where do we start? So we started with the, guidance of going into different lines of businesses to really decide, what should we work on first? And I think the first step is for our team, me personally, to speak with, a bunch of managers up to the VP level across different verticals with the WWT, such as finance, sales operation, marketing, to really uncover their use cases. And to going to these meetings, we actually prepare a set of criteria, as you mentioned, from value and complexity across different levers, right? Within the value piece, there are different levers that we pull, such as what is the use case bottom line impact to WWT in terms of financial value that it brings, operational value that it brings, and also marketing value that it could achieve. On the complexity side, we have help from our data science team to really dive into use case. And this goes back into some of the build versus buy and data governance section that we have discussed earlier on. For each use case, we evaluate the data sources that's associated with it. What is the feasibility of actually bringing the data into the pipeline? And is all the data available to our data scientists for use? So these are the criteria that we went into these meetings evaluating with stakeholders at a very detailed level to really uncover the value and complexity of these use cases before deciding what are the top use cases we should focus on.
Yes, on paper, we did it value and complexity, but I think a third dimension we always had in mind was learnability, and kind of showmanship and creative nuance and stuff like that, because this was all new. Everyone had to learn from scratch on here. So it was like, oh, which one of these would be really cool to do that we could learn from and then repeat it at our customers. So that was always that third dimension that we had in mind.
Well, I think that's interesting because this is the same thing that, except for that last one, maybe not as much, but I feel like these are the same dimensions that every customer should be looking at. And as you mentioned, what Jim Kavanaugh was saying as your CEO, I feel like that was something, take away the name of the person saying it, and this has happened in every company. There's someone in leadership who's saying, oh my God, this stuff is incredible. I've been playing with it. How can we make this more efficient? Well, the first thing we mentioned, the ATC assistant. So I set you up a little bit talking about you know, the ATC has been around for, I know worldwide's been around for 30 years. And I think it's been a part of that gathering data, doing proof of concept, documenting what was learned across all these different domains. All that data exists and you guys have that. Is that one of the things that made this attractive to say, how could we work with that data? Can you explain that specifically for us, Dale?
In the ATC assistant use case, as it first, get incepted, we focused on two key data sources, right? The first one being ServiceNow, where it offers really insight and knowledge at the project at client level. And as you said, Rob, WWT has a plethora of experiences across a wide variety of industry and clientele that we can uncover high level at the project level. You know, what are the insights? What are the technologies that we've worked with? What types of companies and industry that WWT has partnered with in the past? And what are some high level statistics that we can uncover? Whereas at the more technical detail, proof of concept is just one of them that we chose to tackle because of the depth of knowledge and also the technical result that we can extract for business value right there. So those two key data sources are what the ATC assistant first focused on. And Ankur can touch on this maybe in a later section, but essentially ATC assistant is something that we created to be merged with the general WWT chat. And this will create sort of a consolidated view across both WWT platform content, ATC assistant content to form a unified assistant, if you will, to inform business value for our employees.
What would be a workflow that maybe has been in place that you're hoping to affect positively with the chat application? How might that change? Who would be affected? Where do you look to see results? Have you seen anything like that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one use case that we specifically tackle for the ATC assistant is for our engineers to really look into the data in the past to infer upon, new proof of concept that might be tackled in the same technology or the same clientele that we're looking at. For example, if our client is looking at testing SASE technology across two different vendors, and we happen to did proof of concept in the same realm in the past, they can very easily type into the chat, hey, could you provide me past SASE technology proof of concept results from so-and-so clients or industry? So that's one way that we use to uncover the value from WWT or ATC assistant in that matter of fact.
The workflow that Dale just described, right? Like what we have to keep in mind is that the ATC group of engineers is a very small group that have been around for a long time. And it's like people have all that knowledge in their mind, right? Like we did this with so-and-so customer like 5 years back. They have it in their mind that, this was the outcome. And every time like a new request comes in, people have to figure out, who did that? Whose mind would have that information? So now it's like, you don't have to figure out whose mind has that information. All of that information is in a document, which is indexed and ready for you to chat with. So it's like kind of easing the burden on like keeping track of things mentally.
That's one of the dreams, is it not? Because that's institutional knowledge. Because I used to think about, when I was in sales, and we'll talk about why that becomes important in our next project, but was this notion of, I remember working for companies, and they were careful about getting your laptop back and some different things. And the theoretical thing is there's valuable information that could be used to help the next set of people as the organization. Ideally, in a perfect world, organizations will get smarter over time. But the problem is a lot of that knowledge is buried in places where it's not that accessible. And this is really starting to flesh that out. And with the chat app, we're doing it in human language. So the interface is straightforward, easy to ramp up into. People don't have a huge learning curve, I would assume, starting to get productive when these things are built correctly.
And chat, I would also say, is just the first interface. Like the first interface that comes to mind with whenever we talk about Gen AI is chat, but we're hoping that these things would penetrate into your, other applications. So for example, whenever you have like a Salesforce request that comes in for a lab, then and there, you might be able to point them towards like previous labs that we've done that might be of use or of similar nature. So instead of the people going over to a separate chat application to talk about stuff, it could be some sort of a integration into an already existing application where it's not even a prompt-based thing. It's just a push to you. Like, here's what you actually are thinking about. Here's that information that we already know.
The second project is not chat-based, I don't believe, but the RFP assistant. Dale, do you mind setting up what is the RFP? What is RFP? I'll have you explain it first, and then I'll jump in with my opinion.
Sure. So RFP stands for Request for Proposals. And it's oftentimes, RFPs come from vendors or, clients that are looking for a specific solution or services in the area that they'll like to have answers from multiple vendors for.
Yeah.
RFP, proposal generation, and also just evaluating whether RFP is worth generating proposal for is a very lengthy process. And that is essentially the use case that we want to tackle for the RFP assistant discussed in the paper that you read.
Pause there a moment, because I just want to share why I think this is so huge. Personal, perhaps. But so when I was in sales, RFPs were a mixed blessing, because RFPs would come in from some very big customers. Most of them, at least back in my day, were from government side when I worked on that one. And there's very detailed information. Each one of them is structured differently. So there's no model, there's no standard for how they're going to be written, but yet they all have potentially critically important information, some of which you have to dig through just to find out if you should even respond to the RFP, because it's not automatic that just because someone asks you to bid on a project that you'd want to take it. It may not be a smart business decision. You may not have a compelling advantage over your competition, and so you don't want to play in that. Maybe the margins aren't right, whatever it may be. And so there was this thing that we would always go through, and we were kind of on our own at the beginning. The most we could hope to have from the company I worked for was a overly long throw everything into a single PowerPoint and then strip out what you don't need to try and fashion it to the RFP you got. And the individual salesperson was responsible for doing that. So a lot of things can go wrong in that process, not to mention the fact that it'll bog you down so far you probably miss a lot of business. You guys have as I understand from the paper, and this may have changed, but at least 12 people on an RFP proposal team supporting 400 plus salespeople around the world. It sounds like a good ratio, but I mean, that's a bottleneck potentially of where they've got to go through a ton of information as quickly as possible to kind of reformat it and say, here's what we think we should do. What kind of things become possible with AI applied to this RFP qualification is the word, really, qualification process that becomes so important to business?
We separate the RFP evaluation and also, process there into a couple of stages. So first, before you even evaluate whether the RFP is feasible, we need to understand what it is about. So that is the summarization process. And then we go into the qualification process. Once we have a foothold of understanding of what the RFP is about, we then need to understand, whether it is worth it moving forward. The RFP proposal generation process is often a lengthy one. It often takes our team, from the receival of the RFP to generating the proposal for it to submit it around 2, business weeks there. The goal for the RFP assistant is essentially to cut down the processing time and also the manual labor that our team needs to generate response to these proposals that we receive. And for WWT itself, we can speak to around 500 to 600 RFPs that we receive and process on an annual basis, just on the specific team that we're working with. Where there's additional teams such as the government team that also has RFP, RFI that, is outside of the 600 number that I just gave. With that said, when we first went into the RFP assistant, we looked at first, how can we tackle the summarization piece, and also how can we qualify the product. The summarization module, we utilize LLM to give different sections that is predefined by our proposal manager to help our, audience have an understanding of what is the overall ask of the RFP, what is the business value of the RFP, how can WWT respond to this RFP with a competitive advantage, what is the overall timeline, and what are some red flags or green flags that we need to watch out for. So the summarization piece itself save our proposal manager a considerable amount of time. Whereas the qualification piece, we pull data from our Salesforce pipeline to essentially quantify how many proposals we have won or lost in this region of the RFP, and what are some historical RFP that you can refer to as a starting point for your response.
So this is where we actually embed RFPs. Like the content of the RFP, you embed it. And the content of all other RFPs that you've responded to in the past, those are also in that space. So now this RFP is actually closest to this other 5 that we did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago.
And the results of those.
Exactly. And then the results of those. So you have we've probably got like a hit rate of like X% with this RFP. So that kind of gives you an intuitive, idea of how much effort to put into this RFP response, or even go for it at all or not.
I love how enclosed that process is, because it does seem ideal, because it's got a it's got a start and an end to it that you can define, because not everything does. And so you can measure how much you've been able to affect things. So with that said, as I set you up, do you have any data you can share, at least at a high level, of what type of, have you seen any change from this? Is there anything you can brag about or say that you've learned perhaps that you would want to do differently or you're working on?
On the summarization piece, typically it takes our proposal manager 2 to 3 hours, depending on the length of the RFP, to go through an RFP, understand it to the point that they can say, hey, we should move on with it, or no, we should drop the RFP. With the tool, it takes around 3 minutes to 10 minutes, depending on the length and the document, for it to be processed, and also for the summarized, sections to be populated. So you can do the math, but it goes from 2 to 3 hours down to a couple minutes for you to process an RFP. And meanwhile, right, the time that you have saved is idle time that you can be utilized to do additional tasks at hand.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It feels like in that process, you're more focused on how do we not waste people's time? How do we be more efficient with these tools, which in this case is not the salesperson because he's got an RFP person. So they are sending this over. Is it triggered through Salesforce? What's the high level workflow for getting that into the process? And then how does it come back to the customer?
It is actually a parallel two path. So in the first path, on the summarization piece, you very simply, input a RFP itself. The RFP gets summarized by, LLMs in the backend to produce the different sections. And these sections are produced by pre-engineered prompts that's associated with each section. Whereas on the qualification piece, it is another parallel path that utilizes Salesforce as the backend data sources. The exec process is very complicated. Yeah. So essentially, I'll give you a summarized version of it. The RFP that you input into the solution is summarized with a description, whereas all of the RFPs or past RFPs in Salesforce is also summarized into their own data information that's stored in the vector DB. In the backend, we utilize LLM to actually assign cosine similarity that places similar RFPs closer to the RFP that you submitted to give you a stacked rank, similar RFPs in the past that you can take a look at as well.
So could you literally come out of this and say, if assuming someone can't reply to all of them, you can rank them based on value of some sort as well to know what is right for the business? You're actually tweaking maybe in more dimensions than you could have.
This is just one part, right? Like the summarization and the qualification, which would normally span like 1 to 3 business days, is now down to like a few minutes or maybe hours. But then the main meat is also on the proposal writing. So how do you actually respond?
Output.
And that's a developments we've had since the paper was written. So that's maybe not something you already know of, Rob, but as of like yesterday or last week, we have the tool in beta that the proposals team is testing on, where they also get like a first response of the draft. And that those responses are based off of historical RFPs, yes, but also on the platform data, the content on WWT.com, external as well as internal, that's available to our account managers and sales force, as well as, a bunch of other proprietary data sources, including Salesforce and whatnot. All of those together are used to get a first draft of the response in front of the proposal manager. And they were like, oh, this is 70% there maybe. And this takes a bunch of time away from like the time it took for us to create a first draft and put it in front of a SME so that they could validate what we've written is right or, suggest changes. All of that is now pretty fast. We can just take this first response, put it in front of an SME, and then work on top of it.
And I would think that as you guys, the number of submissions that you got for ideas for what to approach a year ago when you started on these, or wherever it was, I'm guessing at the numbers, but I would imagine as we get smarter as individuals and we're looking at our processes different now, there's got to be more people banging on your door, I would imagine, internally going, wait, I want to do this with service contracts or something else to help us optimize. You guys may have started on that. That's not the point. What I love is the twist is here, you guys are an enterprise that is doing what you need for your business, and you're using that as an educational basis, as you mentioned, learning being that other dimension that becomes very important because that's what every customer is going through, which is this is what we want to do in our operation. How do we do it intelligently? Have you learned anything you could highlight that you've learned that you would have done differently, or that you're glad you did, or did you have to go back and redo some things? Any kind of learnings like that come out of this that you're, as an example of what you apply back into your client communication and such too?
When we first talk with the stakeholders, even within our company itself, a lot of times we focus on the value and complexity piece, but we typically often overlook the part where data plays a role in terms of feeding into the LLM pipeline. And this is something that we learn throughout the way, right? As we uncover use cases that we want to do, but the data and the data governance is not in place in the way that will actually allow us to extract insight and feed it into the LLM layer itself. So I think that is a lesson that we learned through a hard way, right? Some of the use cases we tried to tackle, but the data is simply not available or not in a format that is conducive to actually getting utilized by LLM itself. So I think that's one lesson that we learned, that moving forward in the selection of use case, looking at the data and data availability is a key thing that I think every organization should do.
So Dale talked about selection of the use case. On the technical side, I would say selection of the technology. Like a year ago, all of this is brand new, right? So a year ago, there were some names in our minds, right, which were like, oh, this has to be the best option. Let's just go with that. And without naming specifics, we were like, oh, this is like a well-established player in this certain space, in the vector DB technology or whatever. And like now that I'm looking back, like 8 months, 9 months into this development, we're not using any of those, names that we had in mind to go start off with. It's basically a bunch of new companies that did not even exist maybe a year ago, or maybe they existed, but they were pretty small, that have like taken up this opportunity and like scaled up their products, or, given us something differentiator that's actually being used. And a lot of those are in the orchestration and the exchange layer. Open source things like LangChain or Nanosmith and all of those things, which did not exist a year ago, but also on the proprietary side of like, vector DBs like Pinecone or whatever, without naming too many specifics. Yeah.
Yeah. But here's what, and check me if I'm understanding this correctly, but to circle back around, this is the power of the framework that you guys are following, in that these things are going to change again a year from now. There's a bunch of names we haven't heard of. There could be some surprising changes. I'll call out the one thing that we're all probably aware of in the tech industry that happened, but it's like, who knew what was going to happen with OpenAI, and then how they went from the model that they've been at, and all the discussions about, well, what's Microsoft's involvement and how does that mean, what does that mean for where it's going in the future? And so many big questions. Either way, we're working with decision makers in our audience who have to make decisions about, what do I do today to be able to accelerate my ability to manipulate in this to win in this market, because everything is moving fast, but yet we can't ignore it, but we can't jump too fast. So that is why I really like what you guys are doing. I want to just spend the last few minutes and have you comment on, how do you suggest customers engage with you guys in this area?
Majority of the times where we come in is usually when VPs or execs of certain departments or business areas are looking at a holistic approach towards AI. They're like, I want all of this operations or all of this decision making to be driven through data and driven through AI. That is where we come in through a transformational approach, and we're like part consultants, part data scientists, and part hardware experts. That's what WWT is, the backing of a hardware company which can talk about the engineering side of things. We've got our best talent in terms of consulting who can understand business operations and business challenges, and we've got data scientists and data engineers who can work with the data and provide the solutions on top of this. So whenever there's like a transformational change or a paradigm shift that companies are looking at, that's essentially our top differentiator, where we can come in and do end-to-end, not just consult and go away, but consult, recommend the hardware, buy the hardware, install the hardware, work with the data, deliver outcomes, and then go back.
Depending on your maturity and where you're tackling in terms of Gen AI use case, we can help you in any way, right? Whether you're looking to evaluate different LLM models or looking at the different hardwares that you should support from an IT infrastructure perspective, those are all at hand either through ATC or also through our consultant services that we are available to help. And from our experiences building our own internal use case, I think we are very well positioned to advise you. Either you're looking at a very specific use case or you have no idea where to start.
Ankur, Gupta, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Robert. Great to be talking to you as always.
Absolutely. And Dale, thank you for your time as well.
Thank you so much, Rob, for hosting us.
Well, I'm reminded of a quote. By far, the greatest danger of artificial intelligence is that people conclude too early that they understand it. And that's where y'all come in. WWT has loads of resources to help you make top-notch choices and investments in AI. At a minimum, I encourage you to check out today's featured research paper, How WWT is Harnessing Generative AI to Drive Internal Business Value. You're going to find that link and more below. You know, the best time to jump on this was yesterday. That makes today the next best thing. My name is Rob Boyd. Thank you for watching.